Daniel. Please join me on the stage here. Daniel is running a podcast, and he's been interviewing various marketing leaders about positioning, and he has some insights to share. So, Daniel, thank you very much. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. All right, let me share my screen. That's the wrong button. One moment. Can everyone just let me know that you can hear me all right while I set up the presentation? Perfect. All right. Let's get rolling here. That was actually a perfect segue into what we're going to be talking about today. And this mini series that you just referenced that I've been doing for the last couple weeks here. Let me just finalize getting my setup over here. All right. So what I want to talk about today is how some of the top brands approach product positioning. And I just happen to have this this last couple months actually of work where I got to sit down with some pretty cool companies, Airtable, Shopify, Pluralsight, Atlassian, and Spotify, and interview product marketing leaders at those companies about their approach to positioning. So let me just give you a very brief background on me and tell you a little bit about how this whole mini series came to be. So it's funny, Pep, you were just talking about Drift. I actually led product marketing at Drift for a couple of years. I'm now at Privy, but I started my career at HubSpot. I was there in the product marketing team for about a year. I moved over to a computer design company. If you know what computer design is, good for you. If you don't, I'm not going to take the time to explain it. It's mechanical engineering software. And then I got back into MarTech, Drift, and then, like I said, I'm at Privy. I actually joined Privy 2 months before the pandemic and before e-commerce became one of the fastest growing industries because of the pandemic. So it was a really interesting time to join. And if you followed me a little bit on LinkedIn or Twitter, I like to publish a lot about product marketing, then you might know that I really focus on product launches. That's mostly been my background. At Drift, we did about 45 different product launches while I was there. And total in my career, I've probably done about 75. Now, the reason we did so many is because we were going to market every single month with something new for our customers. It was part of our brand guidelines. It was part of our commitment to our customers. And so I spent a lot of time doing product launches at Drift. And in doing that, I actually built this framework for how I go to market. So before we get into positioning, I wanted to mention this. I did a course last summer. Like most people who had extra time on their hands, I decided to turn it into something. And I launched the productlaunchmasterclass.com. If you want to check this out, my framework, you can. I'm going to give you this promo code, getting to market. If you plug that in on the site, you can get $40 off and buy it for $59. I just want to give everyone that offer in case you are interested, because I do appreciate you showing up today and listening to the presentation. But let's focus on positioning. That's what you're here to learn about. Let me tell you a little story about how I got into this mini series, and then I want to share, like I said, 6 things I learned from these conversations. So this is the book. This is the positioning book. This is a great book. It's by April Dunford. It's called Obviously Awesome. And I was reading it. I've been playing some catch up in the last year on my reading list because like everybody, have a little extra time. And I was reading it earlier this year, and I just loved it. It was great. What I did was I took apart her framework that she teaches in the book, and I used that framework to come up with a completely new positioning strategy for Privy. So we were going through this new strategic pivot. We needed a new strategic narrative, and we decided we were going to use this framework to help us work on our positioning. And I used it, and it was great, and it got me super interested in positioning. I wanted to know, who else is doing. Who else is out there I can learn from? And if you do research on positioning, there's books out there, but they're mostly from the 70s and 80s. A lot of them are B2C, and it's a different era, than the 1970s or 80s that we're living in now with technology. And the point that Pep brought up before, 775,000 new startups a day, right? It matters a lot more. So this is the modern book. And then so I decided I wanted to go learn more about him. So I asked my friend Marcus Andrews. He's the host of the Product Marketing Experts podcast. He decided he was going to do a little hiatus. He just done 45 episodes or something like that on the podcast, and I asked him, hey, could I take over for a couple weeks and can I go interview some people on positioning, because it's this gray area. There's lots of questions about it. How do you operationalize it? How do different product marketing teams approach it? How do you what frameworks to use? I had all these questions, and so he said, yes, let's do it. And the Sharebird team hooked me up with some really cool companies, like I mentioned before. Spotify. Actually, let me give you the names because I want to make sure I give everyone that was part of this attribution here. Sam Duboff from Spotify, Lindsay Bayok, the CMO of Pluralsight, Christy Roach, who runs self-serve product marketing at Airtable, Daniel Cooperman, who's the head of product marketing at Atlassian. I got to sit down with all these people and learn from them. And so the mini series, you can totally go check it out if you want to. The good news today, because you're here today, is you're going to get the Spark Notes version of this. What I wanted to do was take 6 lessons, 6 observations I made from all these conversations. Each were about 25, 35 minutes, just so you know, and boiling it down to, hey, here are the 6 big takeaways I had. So that's what I want to go through with everyone today. Before I do, and I'm gonna jump back over to the chat panel here. I can hear some questions coming in. Could you actually chat in either, on a scale from 1 to 5? I want to know, how confident are you in your product's positioning? This is strictly for my own research. I'm just curious. I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I just want to get a sense of how confident people are in their position. Okay, so it looks like majority of people around 2. I see some 1s. By the way, I hope it was obvious. 5 being I'm incredibly confident in our positioning. 1 being I'm not very confident at all. It looks like, and this is not surprising, some people are around a 2 or 3, so mid-range, maybe not super confident. Okay, totally makes sense. That's roughly what I've seen from having conversations with people. So let's get into these 6 lessons that I learned. So first of all, positioning is strategy, not words. This came up so much, and it came up in every single conversation I had with these product marketing leaders. And they really wanted to emphasize, hey, wait a minute, everybody thinks positioning is, what is the tagline on our homepage, and what is the banner on our, our Twitter or our LinkedIn, right? Or even our product pages, right? But it's not. Positioning is strategy. It's not messaging. And we'll talk about that in a second. One of the best sections of April's framework is when she talks about the different types of market frames of reference that you can have in your positioning strategy. And I want to use this as an example to illustrate where positioning is a strategy. So there's 3 different types. There's head-to-head, there's big fish, small pond, and then there's creating a new game, okay? Head-to-head, think Pepsi and Coke. They're competing. They have a very similar product. They're competing for the same market. They're going head-to-head for the same market. Big fish, small pond, a subsegment of the existing market. This is actually where a lot of people fit, right? I actually can uniquely serve a specific audience within an existing market. So a good example that I like to give is Salesforce and HubSpot. Salesforce is the #1 CRM. HubSpot is the #1 CRM for SMBs, right? There's a subsegment there that they are better suited to fit. They have better experience, a more intuitive product. They can do better, customer support. So that's another strategy. And the third is creating a new game, right? And that's what we did at Drift. We created a new market that we created. It was called conversational marketing. It requires a lot of work and a lot of investment, but that's a third type of strategy. So this is just to show you, and again, to illustrate what strategy should be for positioning. And by the way, something I didn't say before, I'm assuming most of you are product marketers. Most of you know product, positioning, messaging. I hope you can take some of these notes today. Hopefully it validates some of the stuff that you've been feeling or thinking. Hopefully learn from some really cool brands and really good product marketing leaders. This is some stuff that you can take back and say, great, these are guardrails I can use moving forward with my positioning strategy. This isn't a framework. This isn't a crash course in positioning. These are the observations I made from the podcast. Okay. Let's talk about positioning versus messaging versus copy. This was a really good, just simple framework I got from Christy Roach from Airtable. Positioning comes first. This doesn't change often. This is your strategy. This is your strategic narrative, right, that we were just talking about. This is laid out with your executive team. Messaging comes second. And messaging, the way to think about it is probably need an annual checkup on messaging. What trends have changed that requires messaging changes? What has changed in our product, or what is changing in our product? What does our product roadmap look like? So this requires sort of an annual checkup. And then copy. Copy comes last. Copy is is related to messaging as it is related to positioning. Messaging comes from positioning, copy comes from messaging, right? And that's campaign based, that's based on the web page, stuff like that. Another thing I heard a lot from these interviews was product marketers aren't copywriters, right? Like Christy kept saying, like, I'm a terrible copywriter. I think I'm a good product marketer and I can own the positioning strategy, but I'm not a copywriter, right? Maybe in a pinch we can do that, but product marketers aren't copywriters. All right, the second thing I learned from these interviews, marketing doesn't own the positioning strategy. And that sounds very controversial to say, but it's true. And let me explain. What came up a lot in these interviews was how important alignment is amongst the executive team on positioning, okay? You can't get very far without your CEO or your executive team backing you up on the positioning strategy, right? April, I actually interviewed her. The interview dropped today. I talked to her and she said, in the early days of her marketing career, she would partner with the VP of sales early on positioning, getting individual reps successful with new positioning before she would even go to the CEO and say, hey, I think we should change our positioning strategy, right? So before she'd go to the CEO and the full executive team, she would start with the VP of sales, make sure that VP of sales was aligned with her on what the positioning strategy is, thinking this is going to be successful, this will work, testing it out on actual sales conversations. And so that was what she would do before she would go talk to her CEO. Christy actually mentioned that she would interview investors and executives to set guardrails before she has conversations with customers, right? You need to have that strategic vision. You need to have some sense of where the strategy is going before you even talk to customers, because customers can lead you in different ways. They don't know your strategy. They don't know what you're trying to own, what market, right? So you need to have those guardrails, which I thought was also very interesting. So the way to think about product marketing's role in positioning, this is what April said to me. She said, think steward, not owner, right? The steward is someone that's going to do the checkups. They're going to check in with customers. They're going to check in with internal stakeholders, right? They're going to do those annual messaging updates. But if product marketing owns positioning in a vacuum, you're going to fail, right? So think steward, not owner. Okay, I'm going to skip this poll question because it would take a little bit longer, and I want to make sure we have enough time. We have about 8 minutes left here. If as we go, by the way, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll get to as many as possible before the next presentation. If not, I'll try to take them offline. All right, the next thing I learned, positioning is a long game, right? When you think about positioning, it's going to take years to develop a positioning strategy and actually implement it and actually get your market to recognize you as the leader in that market or as the preferred choice in that market, regardless of which strategy you take, right? But there is something called the positioning sprint, and Christy broke this down for me. This is what she does. She was actually in the middle of doing one of these when I had the interview with her a couple weeks ago. So I want to explain what this positioning sprint is. So it's a 4 to 6 week sprint to figure out messaging for a given period of time, right? What do we want to say to our audience in the next year? And it requires interviewing executive team, internal stakeholders, and maybe investors, if that makes sense for your organization, and then have those interviews with customers and get that insight. After you do that, you get alignment within your team. You've hopefully built a little positioning team. You're going to take new messaging that you're crafted, and then you're going to bring it back to customers and give them options, right? Give them options, ask them what it means to them and how they describe your product. Have that conversation, right? That's how you get qualitative feedback. Now, there's also ways of getting quantitative feedback, actual numbers with message. This was great for me to learn. I didn't know this. This is a great strategy. Let me walk you through it. There's 2 ways of getting quantitative feedback on messaging. The first is first of all, I should say, she said this, don't go bring something new to a customer like, do you like this, right? Because 95% of the time they're like, yeah, I like this. And then you have 5% of the time people are like, nah, I don't like it. I don't think this makes sense. That's not going to give you anything. What her suggestion is take customers, take your messaging, bring it to customers and ask them to stack rank messaging variations. Bring them 3, 5, 7, maybe 10 different options and ask them to stack rank those options in terms of how much it resonates with them, right? And that, after you've done enough of those conversations, that's how you can get to a place where you say, hey, 70% of the people we brought this to, this resonated with them, okay? And so now you can take that internally and you can bring that within your team. Hey, 70% of the customers we showed this to, they liked it, right? That makes a huge difference because here's the thing. Everybody thinks they can write. Everyone thinks they're a positioning genius. If you can actually have hard numbers on it, that's a great way of going about getting alignment internally. Also try A/B testing. Conversions don't lie. Homepage, product pages. If you get enough volume on your site, definitely A/B test messaging. Okay, we're doing pretty good on time. So the other thing I learned, another observation I learned was to these product marketing leaders, segments matter more than personas. And let me explain that. So this is also part of April's book, and she talked about this, but so did the other marketing leaders I talked to. A segment can be defined by narrowing a set of buyers you're targeting. For example, you might focus on the category of accounting software to accounting software for freelancers or lawyers, excuse me. Sporting goods, right? That could be focused to sporting goods for babies or sporting goods for dogs. The segment needs to meet at least 2 criteria to be worthy. All right, there's 2 criteria. The first, it needs to be big enough to meet the business goals, whatever your goals are with the business. It needs to be a big enough segment. The second is it needs to have a specific unmet need that are common within the subsegment that you can meet, right? This is most of the product marketing leaders I talk to, they're more concerned with making sure they have the right segment that they're focusing on rather than coming up with personas. Sorry for the curse words here. I hope no one's offended by it, but this was actually a quote from April that someone shared with me, and I asked her live in the conversation. I said, hey, you said personas are bullshit. Is that true? And she said, well, kind of. I do kind of think that it's obviously the catchy headline to say that. She says personas most of the time are used as a way to check the box in product marketing. Oh, we have marketing Mary, we have owner Ollie, blah, 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 right? That's not usually actionable, and that doesn't usually help you, create a better messaging strategy based on those personas. It's segments that matter more, right? Segments, what are the characteristics of this company that make them a good fit for my product? And then when you have personas within, if you have too many personas, let's say you have 17 different personas, then suddenly you're gonna have 17 different messages on your website. You're gonna speak to everybody, not speak to anyone, right? So that's where she stands on personas. Now, personas can be helpful, and I actually talked to Lindsay from Pluralsight, and she thought they can be helpful. They do have a place. She understands how people can misuse and spend too much time on personas. But when you do have a more complex sale, buyer personas can add clarity, especially when you have a bigger team and a complex sale. That seems to be the sweet spot where personas are really helpful. If you have a copywriting team, you have a creative team, sales enablement, campaigns, demand gen, etc. Clearly outline the buying persona so that throughout the journey of creating copy or messaging or new web pages or campaigns, that buyer persona is clearly outlined for them. All right, two more points. This one I don't actually have a lot of additional information to provide. Just a major observation: there's no universal positioning framework. There isn't one set of one framework that everybody uses. April's framework came up a couple times in conversations, but it wasn't this one standard way of putting their positioning. Most people have a brand, company vision statement or a strategic narrative. They might have positioning. They call it, messaging houses or messaging docs based on the product, but there wasn't one universal framework that everybody used. Thought that was kind of interesting. And then the last thing, positioning never survives the first sales pitch. I was talking to Daniel Cooperman, who's from Atlassian, and we were talking a lot about, hey, how do you get your sales team on book? How do you get the rest of the team, particularly sales focused there? How do we get the sales team successful with a new messaging rollout? It's hard because they really want to use what's going to work for them, and you can't prove it's going to work until they use it. And he said his number one piece of recommendation was start with a small group. Right? Reps copy other reps. Sales reps copy other sales reps when they see success. So start with a small group, figure out how to make that group, maybe it's 1 or 2 people successful, and then you can scale it up. Make them successful, and then it'll grow internally once you get them successful with a new messaging rollout. When do you know positioning is working? That was a question I had a lot of. Several different answers here. When the sales team's using it in sales pitches, that's when you can go on a Gong or you jump on a call and you hear them using it and the customers reacting to it, that's a sign of success. Another one is when the competition starts stealing your messaging. We saw that a lot at Drift, and we've seen it at Privy. When they start stealing your messaging, that's another really good sign. A/B testing, that's another way, again, to get some quantitative feedback. Conversion rates don't lie. And customers using messaging back to you in conversations when they're saying the words that you come up with, that's usually a good sign that you've connected with them on messaging. All right, I will jump into Q&A. I think we're basically right at time right here. I just threw this back up here in case you want this this course. Just throw in getting to market, the promo code into there, and you can get $40 off get it for $59. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'll look at questions real quick, but I also want to be respectful of the next presenter who's going to jump in just a minute.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So let's do a couple of questions real quick. So the difference between product marketing and growth marketing, what do you say?
I think in a PLG model that becomes more blurred. I understand that. I think product marketing is a more strategic function, and I'd say they're spending more time enabling teams within the company. Usually, as you scale, I like to call it the enabler of enablers, right? You're working within the teams and making sure people are on the same book. Growth marketing, I find to be more focused on results, more focused on demand gen, more focused on experiments and conversions or whatever. And then I think sometimes there's overlap there and in ownership, but I would mostly put growth marketing into a demand gen bucket, and product marketing is, of course, a product marketing function.
Beautiful. I guess we're actually out of time. So, guys, you can find Daniel on Twitter and LinkedIn. He's pretty active there. I follow him. You should too. And if you have further questions, just tweet at him. He might answer.
Awesome.
Daniel,
Thanks, everyone.
thanks
Appreciate
so
it.
much.